any of you ever seen paranormal photos? You take a picture of somebody and there's a ghost in the picture, or light streaks, or vaporous clouds. Okay? Anyway, it's not too uncommon. And I've seen hundreds of such photos. I've taken them myself. So how does this happen? That's the question. What happens is very simple. There's an energy, which is ELF energy, which goes from the person toward the film, and on the film, it may not be exactly where the person is. There is a buildup of these micro bubbles of ELF signals, which are, mind you, are not stopped by anything, the lens, shades, or whatever. That's why people like Uri Geller can hold a camera up with the lens cap on, and somebody else can press the trigger, and you get a perfect picture of him. The lens cap does not make any difference when you're sending ELF waves, okay? So those ELF waves build up plasmons, or what we call microbubbles, on the film emulsion, and they activate, this is a very interesting point, they activate the halide crystal just as though photons had hit it, okay? So there's a very simple explanation for paranormal photos. Now, there's one other thing that is of great interest to everybody. One of the great mysteries is memory. How do we remember anything? What is the process? Let me give you some little background example. One of the most amazing things that I ever experienced in my life was some 30 years ago, and I started working with Peter Herkus, who, as you probably all know, is the #1 psychic for the U.S. Navy and President Reagan psychic and all that stuff. He's pretty hot stuff. And what I found out with him was that if you gave him a picture taken of anybody, anywhere, at any time, and he doesn't have to see the picture, you could seal it in an envelope, he just had to run his fingers over the envelope, and from that rubbing, which is very similar to psychometry for those of you who are, I mean radionics for those of you in radionics, and the rubbing, and there's a whole mechanism to explain that, he would run his fingers over and he would pick up the ELF signals on that photograph, signature, anything. A person could just touch a piece of paper like that, and he'd give you a readout, not only what the person looked like, but his entire past history and his future history and what's going to happen to him in terms of disease and accidents and so on. It would take him hours and hours and hours to give the readout, okay? And that's how he works in locating stolen nuclear material and missing persons and murder and weapons and so on, and that's what he's built his fame on. Now, what that tells us is very simple, and that is that every object that we can conceive of, material object, has memory built into it. In other words, if you're a good psychometrist and you go to some old ruin in the Middle East where there were thousands of years ago something you don't know anything about, you give a rock to a good psychometrist, they will reconstruct the entire history of that site, what happened, to whom it happened, get names and make drawings. It's incredible what kind of information can be recovered that attaches to every object we know, okay? So once you know that, then memory in a human being is not that difficult. If we see something, it runs through a certain track, deposits in a certain little region of the brain. Let's say it's speech. We hear speech. There's a little area called Broca's area, which is about the size of a dime. And all your speech is recorded on that little dime. There have been brilliant linguistic prodigies who have learned as many as 42 different languages. They're all recorded on that little dime-sized area of neural tissue. And that memory is retained throughout a lifetime. You may have a decay of memory due to certain recovery processes, but as you know, the older a person gets, the more they remember things that happened when they were little kids. The memories do retain, just like a stone or a stick or a photograph. So anyway, the memory is there because these little stationary microbubbles, which are attached to the quarks, have a permanent, or what we call a remanent, polarization that lasts for a long, long time. I've done experiments with good psychometrists going back thousands of years in human history where we had some way of checking what happened. For example, a piece of clay from Pompeii, and the subject at that time happened to Peter Herkus. All he had was a box, and in it was wrapped a shard, from a pot. Well, he reconstructed the explosion, picked the date, the event, even got the name very crudely as it was pronounced in those days. So life and living and the planet and everything is loaded, loaded, loaded with memory after memory, and it's very hard to get rid of them, believe me. Very hard to get rid of them. So we live in a sea of memory. Now, that leads me to the last thing. You've all probably heard of Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenetic hypothesis, which says that if 100 monkeys learn something, it's easier for the next 100 monkeys to learn the same thing even though they have not been related to or exposed to the original 100 monkeys. And it all rises out of this fundamental theory of anything that is created mentally, emotionally, gets in the air, sticks to object, that field re-radiates and we can pick it up. Okay? That's simple. I'll let you go now. Thanks a lot for being patient. Yeah. Thank you. Some questions? Yeah.
Measure and equate a quart of water and give it to someone. Could you do the same thing to maybe 10 milliliters of blood sent to you?
Same thing. Yeah. No question about it. Same thing. Yes, Bob. Oh, yeah.
And also the ELF transpenetrated plastic.
Yeah. Okay, the question is to explain the difference to you about the difference in water contained in a plastic bottle versus a glass bottle, okay? There's no question that ELF, 8 Hertz waves, will go right through a plastic bottle as they will go through any other material, okay? But there's something that's filtered out, and we still don't know what it is, which prevents the 8 Hertz from going through the plastic. And we know it goes through, but it does not stick in the water and stay there. We have some water samples which have retained this 8 Hertz charge for about 2 years, okay? Now the converse situation is, and this is very interesting, I only came across this about a year ago. A lady up in Canada discovered, as a healer, that she could take an empty bottle without anything in it, but a glass bottle, and she could charge the glass and then pour the water in it, and the water would get charged with the 8 Hertz, and then when you emptied it, you could refill it, and the glass would retain that charge. So we're finally beginning to understand the difference between one material, like a silicate material, and the plastic, which is a whole bunch of hydrocarbons. So we're still working on that, but fascinating phenomenon. Yeah.
Where is the memory actually stored?
Okay. The question is where is the memory stored? The memory is actually stored in these quarks. That's the seat of memory, and because there are a number of them, it is a seat of computation. Both.
It is what?
The seat of computation, in other words, where all the computational process goes on in the brain. It doesn't occur as we think between synapses. It actually occurs in this living, intelligent little blobs that we can't quite identify. Yeah.
What's the explanation for out-of-body experience, and is it the same for astral or continental or soul travel?
Okay. What is the difference between the different types of out-of-the-body travel? And you mentioned mental, astral, etheric, and so on. What happens is this, very interesting point. You have all these particles, untold zillions that the body is made of, right? Now, the memory is a build-up over the years of a lot of little microbubbles, which are really, if you want to get a visual picture, they're curled up 8 Hertz signals is what they are, to make it very clear. And they are also in here. Now, the fields, the bubbles, create a field that's independent of the particle to which they're attached. So if you want to get somebody to go out of their body, what you do, and you have to know this properly, is you detach the microbubbles from the material basis, and they have a form of their own. They rise from the body, they look like the body. When you're out of your body, and I'm sure a lot of you had this experience, you feel around, and sure enough, you've got limbs, and you've got ears, you've got all the parts, but you've got a field. You don't have the physical substrate there, okay? And that, the interesting thing I learned in my out-of-the-body experiences, that when I left my body, got up in the ceiling and looked down, I realized this thing that I'm so proud of, my body, is nothing. It's the last piece of rag or clothes that I wore. There's no life in it, there's no substance, there's nothing. All of the real meaning is up in that little plasmon bubble thing, which can go through walls like any ELF signal, or go through any matter, go anywhere, travel at any velocity, etc. So I don't know if that explains it, but that's the basic idea.
The other extension was, how does it differ when it goes into these other levels or dimensions? For instance, the astral would be different than the soul itself.
Well, see, when you talk about things like astral and etheric and mental, you have no scientific basis for those statements. They arose out of a lot of experience. Different cultures have different names for all that stuff, right? We don't really know scientifically what the difference is between an astral thing and a mental thing and an etheric thing and so on, and the soul. The experience, when you have the experience, it's all one. To separate them out, I've studied a lot of people who go out of their body and who are very good observers, incidentally. And we can't parse out exactly what these different planes of existence, all these layers mean. It's going to take a lot of scientific observation to really answer your question. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, they're one and the same. Did you hear that question? Any relationship between solitons, which means little kind of donut-shaped worlds of energy called tori or toruses, which have an independent existence. Once you start them out on a course, they go on forever without diminution. And that's really, microbubbles are solitons, except they're micro solitons. Usually we think of solitons in connection with tsunamis, these big tidal waves in the Pacific that are 400 feet high and moving at 600 miles an hour and retain their integrity till they slam into some island or wall, etc. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Do you feel that the thought energy or emotional energy that enters in the microbubble, does it crystallize in there to form that pattern?
I don't really know. I have to get somebody who is an out-of-body traveler, who is trained physicist, chemist, and look at the structure. I've had all kinds of descriptions, but I haven't found anybody who really can answer that fundamental question, that is, do these things crystallize and retain some kind of permanency? I don't know. I wish I could. My guess is not, that they have a dynamic organization, but not a lattice structure like typical crystal. That's my guess, but I don't know for sure. Yes, Tom? No, well, I can't hear this thing that drives me. What? Boy, come here, this thing this wipes out my hearing. It's got 60 decibels going. Yeah.
I'm just asking if you could explain the difference between the Schuman resonance, which is 7.8 hertz, and your watch and also the healers.
Okay. All right. Now, all of you know that there's a big fiction around called the Schumann resonance, which is, depending on which book you read, 7.82 hertz, right? That's supposed to be a fixed constant in nature. It's baloney. You look at the original paper, you look at the calculations, and I did it in one of my books of 25 years ago, not knowing that Schumann had done it already. You take certain parameters. There's certain height to the ionosphere, there's certain diameter to the Earth, there's certain protons, and the ionosphere, the atmosphere is contaminated. For example, I saw some recent data from NOAA National Oceanic and whatever atmospheric organization, and they showed that the lower atmosphere was charged with the highest level of protons ever found. Nobody knows where they came from, but they obviously would change the Schumann cavity size, right? Anyway, so the whole point is that you'll never measure this frequency if you go out with a piece of equipment, because it's a fluctuating thing. It oscillates between about 7.82 and about 8.2 hertz. It's a dynamic thing. It's not fixed. So get that idea out of your mind that there's something fixed, okay? The 8 hertz resonance is not fixed either, because I explained to you, in the body it arises out of nuclear magnetic resonances between hydrogens that are bound in a certain way to carbons and so on. So it actually ranges from 7 to 9 hertz. If you look at a power spectrum, and this is 7 hertz here, and this is 9 hertz here, and this is 8 hertz. You just have a power peak, that's all, and it's shifting. And with the watch, unfortunately, we can fix that. We have it within 100th of a cycle accurate, but that's because we, constrain the parameter. Yes?
The 8.2 is pointing to planet Earth.
Yeah. Every planet has a different frequency, and we'd expect to find different life forms, and yeah.